Joining me in our Washington studio is David Livingston. He's the Deputy Director for Climate and Advanced Energy at the Atlantic Council. David, welcome to the program. So we heard what the mayor of Venice has said, that climate change is to blame for this floodwaters, historic, the worst in some 50 years. What do you make of that? And is there a direct correlation here?
It's certainly an exacerbating factor. I think the best the science tells us so far from the analysis of the flooding in Venice, which, as you pointed out, some of the worst in history, it's some complex combination of a sinking city, a flood defense system, which has been long postponed over time, over budget, and wasn't operational in anticipation of heavy rains. You had strong winds coming north across the Adriatic Sea, and then you also have this low pressure system across the Mediterranean. And it's the confluence of all these factors that caused the flooding that we saw. But certainly, the best way to understand climate change is that it's like every time these high waters come up in Venice every year, it's like throwing the dice. And what climate change does is it takes some of the face on those dice and it turns them from ones to sixes so that this sort of event becomes more and more common.
So are you surprised this kind of thing didn't happen sooner?
It was only a matter of time before we started to get more and more severe flooding. The thing is that the fact that we see these what they call acqua alta, or these flooding events, that's an act of God. The fact that our cities weren't prepared and perhaps won't be prepared in years to come, that's an act of government policy. So it's now a question of how we respond.
Okay, so how should Venice respond, and what should it have done to perhaps make the severity of these floods a little less?
Well, first of all, I think one of the key lessons to take away from here, especially when you think about the climate component, is that so much of what we do to prepare for extreme weather events is based on historical data, and that's just not good enough. We do that oftentimes in the insurance industry, right? They look at actuarial data that looks at the risk of fires in California or the risks of flooding in Venice, and they look backwards into historical data. But what once was a once-in-a-100-year flood, a once-in-a-century flood, is going to become a once-in-a-decade flood, and perhaps soon a once-in-a-only 2 or 3 year flood. And so we need forward-looking models, whether it's for our insurance sector, whether it's looking at the value of financial assets that are at risk to climate change, or whether you're a city manager asking yourself, where should we build up stronger defenses, and how should we anticipate these more severe weather events to come?
So what are the lessons other cities, New Orleans, for example, Amsterdam, looking at this, they're probably saying, oh my goodness, what is it that they need to take away from this disaster in Venice?
Absolutely. It's a great question. We should remind ourselves that Venice isn't the only story here. Half the world away in Australia, in New South Wales, you have more than 70 fires raging at the moment. I'm from California, where the Camp Fire killed nearly 90 people and left more than $16.5 billion worth of damage. So it's absolutely right to ask, what should cities and jurisdictions in various different climate zones and regions of the earth be doing to prepare? They should really be going with the best possible climate models that we have today, not just looking back at historical data, but also trying to understand how climate change is going to exacerbate certain extreme weather patterns. In California, it might be more arid winds and more dry foliage that leads to the kind of perfect conditions for fires to break out. In Venice, of course, it's going to be that perfect mixture of low pressure systems in the Mediterranean, those strong winds across the Adriatic that'll cause flooding. And then what needs to be done is actually, in a pragmatic way, action based on that evidence. Better public-private partnerships, corporations that have vested interest in these cities.
Leaders who believe in climate change.
Exactly. The CEOs that actually do believe in climate change, because it means dollars and cents for their business. It's imperative that they work together with the governors, with the mayors we have that also believe in climate change and want to take action to find creative public-private solutions to start getting the infrastructure and to start getting the policy measures in place that we need.
All right, we'll leave it there. David Livingston, thank you so much.
Thank you, Asieh.